The hidden archive. A woman kneels in an attic thick with dust and the smell of forgotten time. Her trembling hand holds an envelope sealed with red wax. A letter she wrote 25 years ago to a son who never knew he had another mother. But someone else knows the letter exists, and they will kill to keep its secrets buried. 13 hours earlier. Elena knelt on a moth-eaten rug, her knees pressing into the hard wood. The Victorian attic stretched around her in shadows and forgotten angles. The kind of place where a person could disappear into memory. She reached for the heavy cedar chest, with tarnished brass latches. It sat exactly where she remembered, unchanged, patient, waiting. The dry creak of wood answered her grip. She braced herself, drew a breath, and lifted. Her trembling fingers flipped the latches. Click, clack. The sound was small but final, like a lock turning in a cell door. She lifted the lid, and it hit the wall with a heavy thud that echoed through the rafters. Inside lay stacks of yellowed bank statements and a man's blue wool blazer. Thomas's blazer, the one he'd worn to faculty events 30 years ago when they were still newly married, when the weight of secrets had not yet crushed the life out of their wedding vows. Elena pulled out the blazer, careful, reverent, the way one handles the relics of the dead. Beneath it lay a thin sheet of plywood, no more than a quarter-inch thick, carefully fitted into the chest's base. She had hidden it there herself in 1998. She had not thought of it in 3 years, not until Thomas's heart had stopped, not until the lawyers had settled his estate, not until she'd finally found the courage to return to this attic alone. Her fingers hooked under the edge of the plywood. She lifted. Beneath it lay a single cream-colored envelope, sealed with red wax. The seal bore a G for Griggs, her maiden name, an initial she had not used in 40 years. The envelope was addressed in her own sharp, cursive handwriting. To my stepson, Leo. To be read when the lie becomes too heavy. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She brushed her thumb over the wax seal, remembering the night she had dripped it. August 98. A humid Thursday evening. Thomas in his study, door locked. The baby, Leo, asleep upstairs. Innocent of the fact that his entire existence was a fabrication held together by monthly payments and signed silence agreements. A distant car horn sounded outside, muffled by the attic's thick walls and vaulted roof. She gripped the envelope so tight the edges crinkled in her palm. The red wax pressed into the soft skin at the base of her thumb. She could have burned it then. She could have let it crumble to ash in the attic's winter draft, and stepped back into the life she had built. Safe, established, buried deep enough that no one would think to dig. Instead, she tucked it into the deep pocket of her gray cardigan and stood up, bracing her hand against the dusty wall. Dust motes hung in the low slant of orange sunlight, suspended in time, waiting for her next move. She steadied herself and turned toward the attic stairs. Leo's head appeared at the top of the stairs before she reached them. He was 35 years old, wearing a sharp black suit, his face flushed with anger. The metal stairs rang under his shoes as he climbed, each footstep heavy with purpose. He saw the open chest immediately. His jaw clenched. "I told you I'd handle Dad's things, Elena," he said, his voice sharp and accusatory. "What are you digging for?" Elena backed away toward the window. Her hand moved without thinking, covering her cardigan pocket, protecting the envelope like a child protects a secret. Leo lunged forward. He moved with the confidence of a man who had never been refused, who had spent 35 years getting exactly what he wanted. His thick hand wrapped around her forearm, the fingers pressing into the delicate skin above her wrist. "Don't," Elena said. but the word came out as a whisper. Leo twisted her arm down, forcing her backward against the cedar chest. The edge dug into her spine. He reached for her pocket with his free hand, his fingers grasping like a man drowning. Elena used her free hand to shove his chest with all the strength she could muster. It was not much. She was 63, her bones held together more by habit than by health. But it was enough. Leo stumbled back. His heel caught on an old lamp cord, the one that had been there since 1997, snaking across the floor like a sleeping snake. He fell hard, his body crashing against a stack of boxes. The boxes collapsed like dominoes. Books spilled everywhere. Philosophy texts, leather-bound volumes from Thomas's collection, things Thomas had loved more than he had loved the truth. The thump reverberated through the attic. Elena didn't wait. She bolted past him, her shoes clattering down the metal stairs, hands still pressed against the letter in her pocket. The metal rang beneath her feet like a bell tolling. Ping, 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 each step a note in her escape. That evening, Elena sat at the pine table in her kitchen. The light hummed above her head, a familiar sound that had become the ambient noise of her widowhood. She was breathing hard still, her heart still racing like a small animal in a trap. From her other pocket, the one Leo had not managed to reach, she pulled a small Polaroid photograph. The photo showed her late husband, Thomas, holding a baby. The baby was dressed in white, his fists curled up against his face. He had a distinctive birthmark on his left wrist, exactly like the one Leo had been born with, had carried through his entire life, had never questioned. But the date on the back of the photo read August 1982. Elena flipped the photograph over. The handwriting was in red ink, the letters careful and deliberate. Leo, 3 months old, Berlin. August 1982, Berlin. The family story was that Leo was born in London in 1985. Thomas had told her this the day they met at a faculty mixer. "I have a son," he'd said, his eyes carrying the particular loneliness of divorced men. "He'll be starting at St. Christopher's this fall. 7 years old already. Time moves too fast." She had believed him. She had married him believing that story. She had kept his secrets believing every word of his carefully constructed narrative. Leo, born in Berlin in 1982. Elena paled. The skin around her mouth went white. She stared at the calendar on the wall without seeing it. If he was born in 1982, then Thomas was still married to his first wife, Sarah, during Leo's birth. Sarah, who allegedly died childless in 1984. Sarah, who according to the stories Elena had been told in whispered confidences over 20 years of marriage, had never wanted children. Sarah, who had become a ghost, a cautionary tale about the dangers of wanting a career more than a family. But Sarah had not died childless. Or if she had, it was because Thomas had taken the child from her. The refrigerator hummed, the sound steady and mechanical. Elena sat perfectly still, her hands flat on the pine table, the Polaroid photograph between them like evidence at a crime scene. The sound of shattering glass woke her. Elena had fallen asleep on the sofa that night, exhausted from the confrontation, from the revelation, from the weight of carrying knowledge that was not hers to carry. The sound jolted her awake. Sharp, sudden, the unmistakable crack of a window breaking. She lay in the dark for a moment, her mind sluggish with sleep, trying to place the sound. Then she heard the scraping of glass, the sound of something heavy shifting against the jagged edges of a broken pane. She opened her eyes. The side window, the one that looked out onto the front garden, now held a jagged hole near the lock. Glass lay scattered across the hardwood floor, glinting dully in the light of the street lamps outside. A gloved hand reached through the opening. Elena didn't think. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the hearth. It had hung there for 30 years, untouched except by the occasional passing of a feather duster, and swung it with both hands, gripped tight. The metal whistled through the air. For a moment, there was nothing but that sound, that terrible, clean sound of something moving toward impact. Then the poker connected with flesh and bone. A muffled shout of pain followed. Muted, distorted, but unmistakably human. The gloved hand retreated quickly, leaving only a faint smear of blood on the window frame. Elena rushed to the glass, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Through the rain that had begun to fall, she could see a figure in a gray hoodie sprinting toward a parked silver SUV at the curb. The figure moved with purpose, with urgency, with the kind of desperation that comes from having failed a mission. The tires of the SUV screeched on wet asphalt. The vehicle pulled away into the rain-soaked street and disappeared. Elena stood at the window, the poker still gripped in her white-knuckled hands, and realized that the letter in her cardigan pocket was more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She locked the door and moved to Thomas's old study. The room smelled like him. Leather and old paper and the particular mustiness of a man's private thoughts. She pulled open a shelf and found the hollowed-out dictionary where he had always kept his secrets. Inside, tucked between the false cover and the actual book, lay a leather-bound ledger. Her hands shook as she opened it. The entries began in 2010. Each page was marked with monthly dates and careful, meticulous handwriting. Not Thomas's handwriting, someone else's. Someone organized and methodical. Monthly disbursements, MR. Elena flipped through the pages. The entries were uniform, relentless, a rhythm of silence purchased with money. She found the year 2010 and began to read. $2,000 to Miss Rostova for silence every month, like clockwork, for 15 years. The last payment was dated the day Thomas died. The entry was in the same hand as all the others, precise and cold. Elena gasped for air. The room seemed to contract around her, the walls closing in. She sat down heavily in Thomas's leather chair, the ledger open on her lap, and realized that her husband had been paying for silence for longer than she had been alive. That he had paid for it through their entire marriage. That he was still paying for it after death. From the cold calculations of his estate, from the money she was living on now. She was living on the price of a secret. At 3 a.m, the kitchen landline rang. Elena picked it up. Her knuckles were white on the receiver. The phone felt heavy, like holding a weapon, like holding something dangerous. "I know you found the ledger, Elena," Leo's voice said. It was low, menacing, a voice she had never heard from him before. "I know you found the ledger, and I know what you're thinking." "Leo," she began, "don't go to the police." His voice cut through her attempt to speak. "Don't go to anyone. You don't know what you're touching. Do you understand me?" The line went dead. Elena stood in the kitchen, listening to the dial tone, understanding that there were now 2 separate truths fighting for control of her life, and both of them were willing to kill to keep her silent. The pier was deserted at dawn, wrapped in a heavy fog that rolled in from the water like a living thing. Elena walked down the wooden planks, each step hollow beneath her feet. The fog absorbed sound, swallowed it whole. She could hear the waves lapping against the barnacled pilings below, the groan of the pier settling on its ancient supports. A woman in a tan trench coat stepped out of the fog. She was perhaps 70, perhaps older, with dark eyes that held the particular intensity of someone who had been waiting a very long time for something. She had high cheekbones and the sharp geometry of a face that had not softened with age, only grown more defined, like something carved from stone. But it was the eyes that stopped Elena. Dark brown, almost black, set above a mouth that was curved into something that might have been a smile, or might have been a threat. She looked exactly like an older version of the woman in the 1982 photograph. The one holding Leo in Berlin. "Elena," the woman said. Her accent was faint but present, Eastern European, perhaps Russian. "I am Maria Rostova. I have been waiting 35 years to meet you." Elena opened her mouth to speak, but before she could form words, Leo stepped out from behind a stack of shipping crates. He had a small black handgun aimed at both of them. His face was twisted with rage, a kind of rage that went deeper than anger, that seemed to come from somewhere fundamental and broken. His eyes were bloodshot, his suit rumpled, his tie undone. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. "I told you to stay out of it," he screamed, his voice raw. "I told you not to dig. She's the reason Mom is dead." "Leo," Elena said. But he was beyond hearing. Elena lunged at his arm as he aimed the gun at Rostova. The two of them struggled for control of the weapon. Leo was stronger, but Elena had the advantage of desperation. She fought with a clarity that came from understanding that her death in that moment would be merely the final punctuation mark on a life lived entirely in service to other people's lives. Leo slammed her against the wooden railing. The ancient wood cracked under the impact. Elena felt something give in her ribs, a sharp flash of pain like lightning. But the railing held. She pushed back against it, using it as leverage, using the pier itself as a weapon against him. Leo threw her to the ground. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. She lay on the weathered boards, gasping, watching as he raised the gun toward Rostova. But Rostova charged him with a heavy metal flashlight she had pulled from her coat pocket. Her movements were fluid, practiced, the movements of someone who had survived worse than this. She struck Leo's wrist with the full force of the flashlight. The gun flew from his grip and disappeared into the dark water below, with a sound like a sigh. Leo fell to his knees, cradling his wrist, which was already swelling. Rostova stood over him like an executioner. She pulled a birth certificate from her coat, crumpled and aged, the paper soft from being handled countless times. She held it in front of Leo's face, forcing him to look at it. The paper was yellow with age, the ink faded but still visible. Mother, Maria Rostova. Father, Thomas Galdos. Date, 1st August 1982. Place, Berlin. "He didn't adopt you," Rostova said, her voice like ice. "He stole you from me in Berlin and paid me to disappear, to stay dead. Your mother, Sarah, never even knew you existed. Thomas took you from me while I was sleeping, took you from my apartment, and I never saw you again." Elena looked at Leo, still kneeling on the pier, and understood that everything was about to collapse. Leo grabbed Elena's arm, not violently this time, but with a kind of desperate urgency that contained within it a question and a plea. Police cruisers were turning down the pier road, their lights cutting through the remaining fog like searchlights. "Come on," Leo said. His voice was hollow, broken. "Come on." They ran toward the parking lot. Leo's silver SUV sat where he'd left it, the engine still running, the keys already in his hand. He pushed Elena toward the passenger side and threw himself into the driver's seat. They pulled out of the parking lot just as the first police cruiser came into view, their tires smoking on the asphalt. Inside the moving SUV, Leo drove with one hand, while his other hand tore open the red wax on the letter with his teeth. The wax crumbled like ancient stone. He pulled out 2 pages of dense writing, his eyes scanning the middle paragraph while the car swerved through morning traffic. Elena watched him read the words she had written so many years ago, watched his expression shift from rage to confusion to something that looked almost like understanding. Maria didn't just let him take you. Leo read aloud, his voice shaking. She tried to sell you to a broker. She tried to sell you to a man in Vienna who dealt in orphans and unwanted children. I was the one who paid her the first $50,000 to let Thomas take you to safety. I stayed silent to keep you from knowing your mother saw you as a paycheck. I sacrificed my soul to keep your image of a family intact, Leo. I'm sorry I let the lie live so long. Elena looked out the window. The city passed in a blur. She was crying silently, her shoulders shaking, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The confession she had written 25 years ago, the one she had thought she would take to her grave, was now a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. A quiet park overlooked the river, a place of stone walls and old oaks, and the kind of stillness that came from being far removed from the chaos of the city. Leo pulled the SUV into the empty parking lot. They sat in silence for a long moment, the engine still running, both of them staring at the river below. Leo held the bank ledger in one hand and the cream envelope in the other. From his pocket, he produced a Zippo lighter, the kind he had probably carried for years without thinking about it. He flicked it open. The flame caught, small and bright and absolute. He held the corner of the bank ledger to the flame. The paper caught immediately, eager to burn, eager to be unmade. The cream envelope followed. The wax seal blackened and curled. The words that Elena had written, the secrets, the confessions, the explanations, turned to ash. They burned together, the ledger and the letter, the proof and the truth, all of it dissolving into smoke that rose into the morning air. The ashes flew away in the wind, scattered across the parking lot and toward the river below. Some of them caught on the stone wall. Others sailed out toward the water and disappeared. Leo turned to Elena. He reached out and took her hand, the one he had bruised earlier during the struggle on the pier. He brought it to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that seemed to contain within it both an apology and a question, and an answer. The sun was reflecting off the river below, turning the water to molten gold. "You aren't my stepmother, Elena," he said, his voice soft and broken. "You're just my mother. Let's go home."